The Sabah dispute is easier to follow if it is told as two different ways of reading the same history, one that strongly supports Malaysia's title to Sabah and another that keeps the Sulu-Philippine claim alive as a legal and historical argument. Both lenses look at many of the same events, but they weigh documents, stories, and principles differently. From the Malaysia-leaning view, the key question is, can you prove on paper that Sulu owned Sabah? The story often told is that Brunei gifted part of North Borneo, now Sabah, to Sulu as a reward for helping crush a rebellion. However, there is no clear signed document where the Sultan of Brunei officially transferred Sabah to the Sultan of Sulu. Brunei also denied ever having done this. Because of that, this side says there is no solid legal proof that Sulu ever had full ownership of Sabah. From the Sulu-Philippine-leaning view, the focus is broader than surviving paperwork. They argue that older grants might not have survived or might not have followed later European-style treaty formats. They point to traditional accounts, local chronicles, and indirect evidence that Brunei did give Sulu rights over parts of North Borneo, and that these rights should still matter even if the perfect deed is missing. From the Malaysian-leaning view, the main ownership line runs through Brunei and Britain. In 1878, the Sultan of Brunei signed an agreement with European partners who later formed the British North Borneo Company, BNBC, ceding North Borneo and even granting titles like Maharaja of Sabah to Baron von Overbeck. This is treated as the key step. Brunei, BNBC, Britain, later Malaysia. When BNBC signed the second agreement in 1878 with the Sultan of Sulu, this view sees it differently. The company already had title from Brunei. The agreement with Sulu was mainly to avoid conflict and secure cooperation in areas where Sulu had influence, not to recognize Sulu as the true owner. From the Sulu-Philippine-leaning view, the 1878 agreement with Sulu is much more important. They argue that BNBC would not have bothered to negotiate with Sulu if Sulu had no meaningful rights. In their reading, the Sulu agreement shows that at least part of North Borneo was treated as being under Sulu's control, and that what BNBC got from Sulu was more like a lease or pledge than a simple purchase of sovereignty. The 1878 Sulu-BNBC agreement uses the Malay word pajak, and this one word lies at the heart of many arguments. From the Malaysia-leaning view, pajak is interpreted as a form of grant or cession, meaning a permanent handover. Later references to cession money are read as proof that the payments were the price for a permanent transfer of sovereignty, not rent. From the Sulu-Philippine-leaning view, in many historical Malay world contexts, pajak can also mean lease, pledge, or mortgage, where the original owner keeps ultimate title but grants use in exchange for continuing payments. Because payments continued over time, they see this as acting more like rent for a leased territory than one-time purchase. In this lens, Sabah was never fully sold. It was pajaked out, and the underlying Sulu rights survived. Several big colonial-era agreements shape how each side sees the dispute. From the Malaysia-leaning view, in 1878, the Sultan of Sulu accepted Spanish sovereignty and surrendered his sovereignty over Sulu's possessions and territories. In 1885, through the Madrid Protocol, Spain recognized British control over North Borneo and gave up any claim to that area. If Sulu's external affairs and sovereignty was already under Spain, and Spain then renounced rights to North Borneo in favor of Britain, this view says whatever Sulu might have claimed in Sabah was effectively gone. From the Sulu-Philippine-leaning view, they argue that Spain could not give away what Sulu had only leased out to BNBC. In other words, if the 1878 pajak was a lease, Spain's later renunciation of sovereign claims does not automatically erase Sulu's underlying landlord-type rights. They also stress that many of these treaties were drawn up between colonial powers and may have focused more on dividing spheres of influence than on carefully sorting out older local titles. From the Malaysia-leaning view, the burden of proof lies firmly on those who claim that Sabah once belonged to Sulu. Their position is, if you say Brunei gave Sabah to Sulu, show the signed transfer document from the Sultan of Brunei to the Sultan of Sulu. Because no such clear mutual deed has been produced. They say the claim is not proven. Meanwhile, they point to actual surviving documents between Brunei and BNBC and to later treaties as evidence supporting Malaysia's side. From the Sulu Philippine-leaning view, the rules of proof are more flexible. They emphasize that not all important historical transfers were written the way modern lawyers would expect, and some documents may have been lost. They argue that consistency of local tradition, maps, and European references to Sulu-influenced territories in North Borneo should count toward showing that Sulu had real rights, even without a single perfect deed. Finally, both sides look at what Sabah is today, but they draw different lessons from it. From the Malaysia-leaning view, before Malaysia was formed in 1963, a United Nations mission asked the people of North Borneo, Sabah, and Sarawak what they wanted. The mission reported that most supported joining Malaysia. The UN Secretary General's conclusion spoke of them finding their future as component states of Malaysia, and Sabah has been administered as a Malaysian state ever since, with broad international recognition. Because of this view sees Sabah's status as part of Malaysia as settled in practice and in international politics, even if historical debates continue. From the Sulu Philippine-leaning view, they acknowledge that Sabah is governed as part of Malaysia and that the people chose that political path. But they argue that self-determination in the 1960s does not automatically erase older legal or proprietary claims if those claims were never formally resolved. In this lens, it is possible to say Sabah is a Malaysian state now, but there may still be unresolved questions about compensation or historical rights tied to that original 1878 agreement. Seen through these two lenses, the same documents and events, old treaties, the word pajak, colonial deals, and the UN mission are used to tell different stories about Sabah. One story stresses surviving documents, clear title from Brunei to Britain to Malaysia, and modern recognition to say that the issue is closed. The other story leans on alternative readings of pajak, missing but claimed historical grants, and the idea that some rights might survive even when borders and governments change. In the modern era, the Sabah question has shifted from old 19th century treaties to a mix of international law, court battles, and regional politics. For Malaysia, recent court victories in Europe that set aside a multi-billion-dollar arbitration award claimed by the Sulu heirs are presented as a major step toward closing of legal challenges, reinforcing its view that Sabah's sovereignty is settled by long-term administration and the 1963 UN recognized act of self-determination by Sabah's people. On the other hand, the Philippines generally keeps the claim formally on the books but low-key, avoiding both an active legal campaign and a clear renunciation that might anger the Sultanate's heirs or supporters of the historical claim. In practice, the main frictions today tend to appear around maritime boundaries and sea rights in the Sulu and nearby seas, while both countries publicly emphasize ASEAN cooperation, trade, and security ties. So, even as the two lenses of history still offer different stories about the past, Day-to-day policy increasingly relies on a third lens, a shared interest in regional stability, where both sides agree to disagree on Sabah while working together on wider economic and security goals.